Hey everyone, welcome back to Beyond Evolution, where we help you navigate AI's impact on our society. Today's guest is someone who embodies the future of human potential, Dr. Vivian Ming. She's a theoretical neuroscientist, entrepreneur, and one of the most visionary thinkers at the intersection of AI, education, and equity. From founding Socos Labs to developing AI tools that support learning, parenting, and even mental health, Vivian's mission is to use science and technology to unlock the best in people, especially those the system tends to overlook. Her story is just as inspiring as her work, and I can't wait to dive into this conversation about how AI can truly transform education, not just with data, but with heart. Without further ado, let's hop into the conversation. Vivian, so great to have you here. I'd love to hear your background and your journey through AI, through Socos Labs, and just kind of all of it. Just give us a little bit of a background.
Yeah, well, I guess I could say as a kid of the 70s, my introduction to AI is probably the original Cylons or C3PO or what have you. My professional introduction to machine learning was when I thought I was going to be a wet neuroscientist and stick wires into cat brains or do rabies retrovirus or all the horrible thing we neuroscientists do. And completely out of the blue, a professor recommended me to be a research assistant in a lab called the Machine Perception Lab, which had just gotten millions of dollars from the CIA to build a facial analysis system for real-time lie detection. And so my undergraduate honors thesis in 1999 was a neural network that could learn the difference between a real and a fake smile. So I've always been interested in studying human beings, but the idea of using AI to do that, from that moment, I was hooked. My research as a graduate student was again about people, about how we hear and how our hearing system of all animals work. But again, we used machine learning. I developed algorithms that could learn how to hear. We literally walked around in parks with microphones with a computer on my back, and it learned how to hear from just listening to the natural world. But again, for me, it's about understanding people. I was housed in a psychology department and in a computer science department and in a neuroscience program. So I'm all over the place. But it's this interesting idea of taking this immensely powerful tool of machine intelligence and using it to understand natural intelligence. Little could I have known in 1999 or even 2006 that like this is going to win Nobel Prizes, this is going to take over the business world. I mean, there's a lot of hot trends that come and go, like augmented reality and 3D television and what have you, that never really go anywhere. But, just need to spin up your favorite LLM and ask it about trade negotiations between the central government of Romania and Transnistria and the implications for the independence movement there. And they'll write an amazing essay that people that actually economists and political scientists that study this would be envious of, to see there's something more here than just another flash in the pan. To be there in the early days, I mean, I was already hooked because I just got to see this thing, not from its earliest days. Its earliest days are back in the early 60s, but from the, building one of the first systems that could outperform a hand engineered system. We used my algorithm that learned how to hear to compress audio better than an MP3 could. And, it just felt like a moment that in those early 2000s where, wow, this stuff is in some ways, but not every way, smarter than we are, better than what we're able to engineer. And it's going to have an impact. It's also clear it's taken a while for that to truly come to the fore. So that's my introduction to AI and my background in the space.
Awesome. So you mentioned machine learning, and you said you use that to understand facial recognition and really use machines to help you understand more about, the physical world and the people side of things. Can you dive a little bit more deeper into that? Like, how did you use the algorithms? How did you come up with the algorithms, or like use machine learning itself for our listeners?
Yeah, in some ways it's different. What is the task you're going to work on? So I described two instances. One is sort of finding, my actual very first project found the pupils and the philtrum. It's this little weird thing below your nose. And I came up with an algorithm to do that, which is to say, essentially, I came up with a set of equations. I implemented it in a computer program. And then, crucially, because this is what's different between the kind of AI that most people think of, like there's rules and robots have to follow them. There is no such thing. That is not what modern AI is about. In machine learning, it's about specifying these equations, implementing them in a program, and then giving it information. So, for example, there's this thing called the Timmett face database. All right, so I give it all of these faces. And then we have the data from the CIA. So now we have video of people, no audio, we don't have context, just people talking and their heads moving around. And we sort of by hand trace out where the pupil and the philtrum is in every frame of video. And our system had to find it based on these equations, and then you do some fancy math to rotate the faces around. And then a neural network would analyze all these facial features. So if parts go up and down, and the relationship between the corners of your mouth and your eye and the supraorbital muscles, these are things that contract around your eye. All these things change depending on what your face is doing. And importantly, change differently for a real and a fake smile. And in essence, my computer program learned the statistics of those changes. Then when we built the system that learned how to hear as a grad student, now it's a completely different model with different equations, but still the broad conceptual idea. I have equations implemented in a program. Now I give it lots of data. In this case, all of these audio recordings, which are all these little waveforms going up and down, but represented as numbers. And it needs to learn how to represent those. But then let's go dramatically different, because after I graduated, was then a research scientist at UC Berkeley, and I had an appointment at Stanford. And my wife and I had the idea to start an educational technology company together. Well, what does that have to do with faces or sounds? Well, it's true. Students talking to each other in an online discussion forum seems completely different on its surface. But the basic idea, I could define a set of equations, implement them in a computer program, and then feed in lots of information. In this case, what I'm feeding in is all of those words they were using, all of these exchanges going back and forth. It wasn't nearly as sophisticated as what modern large language models are doing, like ChatGPT, but still, we were turning words into numbers. Our equations and our programs would process them and adjust themselves based on their accuracy in predicting aspects of those words. And then that gave us this system. And what did we do in that context? Here, we were able to predict at week 1 of the course what grades the students would get just from free-form conversations in this discussion forum. So these feel like totally different domains. And this is what's so beautiful for my career in AI is it's kind of, as someone who's just interested in people, all the way from individual neurons in your brain to how do global societies interact and big economic theories. I get to explore all of that because, frankly, the AI doesn't care. It's turning numbers into more numbers. As long as you can think cleverly, how do I get the data? And what's the right model, the right set of equations to make that transformation that's interesting to the problem I'm working on? You can work on any problem whatsoever. So, somewhat notoriously, I got to build a model to treat my own son's diabetes. I got to build a model to reunite orphan refugees with their extended family members. I've got a little box behind me here, which is the first ever biological test for postpartum depression. So, this little test is a blood test. That's not AI. But the thing that we built that analyzes the blood test, or more specifically, the epigenetics of the moms, impossible without artificial intelligence, without machine learning to actually make that happen. So, in some ways, I'm a one trick pony. I figured out that I could use AI or machine learning to answer all of these different kinds of problems. And the cool thing is that lets me really focus on the problems rather than getting caught up in, just doing one thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing both of those examples. I think it really truly is amazing to see how AI can benefit and change people's lives for the better in so many different fields, whether that's in healthcare, whether that's in ed tech, like you were saying, whether that's in like neuroscience. So I think it's really impressive what AI can do if you learn, the base skill of machine learning and what problems you can solve in all these different areas.
And I think part of what is important to understand is not just what it can do, but what it can't do.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there's this pitfall on the other side that I'm sure we will have a chance to dive into here of thinking, oh, it can't do anything, it's all pretend, versus it's somehow magic and it will solve all problems. And all you have to do is sprinkle processors on a problem and it will go away. And you hear certain kinds of famous self-appointed thinkers in this space, and they genuinely have this vision, or at least they publicly have this vision of super intelligent AIs will literally solve all of our problems.
Mm-hmm.
And that's everything about human society should be focused on building them. Whereas I am deeply practical. There are things I understand about the world today, and there are problems I get to work on in education, in workforce, in health. One of my companies works in Alzheimer's. One of my nonprofits, we are working on a biobehavioral model to understand how life, social, and cultural factors predict things like breast cancer risk or Alzheimer's risk 30 years from now, and how you could change those risks. Grounded problems that AI could make a transformational impact on without it having to be, it's got a phoenix feather wand. And if you just know the right incantation, it'll magically fix everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's so key because there's a lot of conversation around AI right now, and it's a lot of just talk, and there's fear behind it, and there's definitely excitement as well, of like all that it can do. But when you actually look at the capabilities of it and like understand the true baseline and like what you actually need to learn to actually implement these changes, that's where the real change will happen. It needs to come down to the computational skills, with machine learning, with the coding, like vibe coding. How do we use that technology to actually solve those issues and not just talk about them and they're just going to magically go away, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is some real tensions here. It's real versus fake is the one I think we can dispense with right off the bat, but it'll destroy everything, it'll save everything. All these utopianist and dystopianist visions at its heart, and I know we're going to get into this, understanding what it is best at versus what we are best at. That's the heart of the discussion for me. It certainly is the heart of the discussion of AI in education. But frankly, AI is what we do with it. And so it isn't just about AI in education. It's kind of anywhere you're thinking about deploying it, understanding what is a human problem and what's a machine problem, and then how those interact. What does it mean for the interaction between humans and machines? Like, that's the whole game, and there's so much to be said about that.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned a lot of experience that you've had for quite a while of like machine learning and AI in general. So, how have you seen the communication and like the discussion around AI change from back then to where it is now?
Yeah, part of what that change is and the nature of it is it turns out there are shockingly few people that study both kinds of intelligence at the same time. And that has created some problems. So, back when I got started, it was actually technically what people would call an AI winter, which is to say, people were so excited about neural networks, starting with the parallel distributed processing movement in the 80s. And then that ran into the 90s, and conferences were built around it, but it just was never able to deliver. And if we really wanted to nerd out, we could talk about what it is Jeff Hinton did that sort of a decade later made a big change there. But you had this foundational work, again, going way back, but even in the pure machine learning space, all of this exciting foundational work that just wasn't able to deliver beyond scientific curiosity. So a field like mine, theoretical neuroscience, was people that weren't trying to build AIs per se. We were trying to understand how the brain works. We were suspicious that, well, if we could build a big enough AI model and feed it enough data, how does our visual system or our auditory system develop? Well, part of how it develops is we as babies see and hear lots of things. If we don't, both of those regions of our cortex develop very differently. We certainly know that much to be true. So there's something about that. Lots of data and some sort of statistical learning system going on in the brain. Well, let's build theoretical models. In my case, based on information theory, but implemented now, we'd call it AI, and give it lots of examples and let it learn. And then maybe we learn something about ourselves at the same time. What we didn't really appreciate, because when I was a grad student, Jeff Hinton's lab was the main lab. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, he's the guy who just won the PhD and that won the Nobel Prize in Physics this year for his work in deep neural networks. Notably, the other person who won it jointly with him is a guy named John Hopfield. So John Hopfield was Terry Sinofsky's advisor. Terry Sinofsky was the principal investigator on my facial recognition project. So my advisor's advisor just also won the Nobel Prize, also for machine learning, but his was much earlier work. And so we were here where there's a scientific curiosity, interesting to the small group of people that want to study the brain, still interested to computer scientists that are trying to build stuff. There's grants from the US Department of Defense for target acquisition. Can you analyze these satellite images for us? Can you find a tank, hidden in this big picture? There is lots of work going on, but none of it's able to deliver. And so for the first 10 years of sort of my involvement, it largely remained a curiosity. By the way, other areas of artificial intelligence arguably were taking off. You call it an AI winter. Google was founded in that AI winter. And its instant auction systems, the PageRank stuff, arguably that's all AI too. Not really the machine learning we're talking about, but it's all AI. And it created a multi-trillion-dollar industry. So it's not like nothing was happening. But what we, of course, want is to have a conversation with C3PO. And hopefully not Skynet. And so it just doesn't feel fully realized. And then starting in about 2006 into 2008, particularly Jeff Hinton's lab, but not only his lab, start saying, well, what if we stack a bunch of neural networks on top of us, make deep models, multiple stacked layers. And suddenly they get these huge improvements in the performance in image recognition and speech recognition. And people get really excited. Google and AT&T for the speech purposes and all these others start pumping money into this. And the improvements accelerate along with access to these new chips, GPUs that were being repurposed from computer gaming into modeling these images and these sounds and now videos and words. It really exploded quickly. still probably a scientific curiosity until, the late 20 teens. Google is really investing heavily and aspects of machine intelligence behind the scenes. No customers interacting with it, but behind the scenes, it's deciding the videos that you watch. It's deciding books to recommend. It's analyzing you to try and figure out who you might vote for. A lot of that stuff was some early work in this space. For me, during that time, it's building these models to understand students, building models to understand my son's diabetes. These were all sort of pre-deep neural network times, but it wasn't until 2016 or so. Even then, in 2014, 15, I'm the chief scientist of a company called Guild. We're one of the first companies doing AI and hiring. And we end up on the cover of the New York Times. We're on the cover of the Atlantic. Because again, it all seems like magic to people. Our customers are Google and Facebook. Our models weren't anywhere close to as large or sophisticated as GPT or Claude or Gemini, but even the little things that we were doing were transformative in that space. I actually got a call from the White House saying, would you consider being the assistant undersecretary of labor to the Obama White House, just because it seemed like we'd figured out everything about labor. Mm-hmm. All because I had a model that, was analyzing people's data. It was really heady. So that was that transition period in the mid-teens, but it still was behind the scenes. An average person wasn't interacting with it. It had to be built by hand, by teams like mine. It had to be deployed in a task-specific way. So I would say the next big breakthrough, and I'll take a little pause at this, would be kind of late. I mean, this kind of started before the pandemic with the very earliest release of GPT. But the newspaper, the Financial Times, interviewed me the day ChatGPT first came out, the sort of 3.5e version of ChatGPT. And its interview questions were so boring, but they were also legitimate. They were perfectly reasonable questions, and it clearly understood who I was and asked relevant questions about my work. The only thing that made the interview fun was I then could explain to the actual human interviewer why it asked the question it asked and how the statistics must have pulled up this information. But I think that was that moment. Well, now someone who knows nothing about AI and a reporter from the Financial Times can interview someone they'd never met before simply by having GPT come up with the questions. And I think that was the next moment that changed. So it went from, my very first project where a computer program I built could tell if someone was truly smiling or not, to I could understand what students were talking about in a free-form discussion, to ending up on the cover of the New York Times, to being interviewed by an AI in the midst of the pandemic. Like, these are the moments for me that could see the slow progress behind the scenes of the big moments where it felt different.
What were you going through in that moment? Like, what was going through your head throughout this whole process? What were you feeling?
I mean, in each of these moments, I felt hopeful. I felt hopeful not because I sort of default to that. I don't. I have a fairly interesting personal story, and it isn't always a happy one. But I felt hopeful because I run a philanthropic lab. Historically, it was called Socos Labs. We've kind of now expanded into a new project called the Human Trust. But people bring me challenging problems, and leveraging what my team and I know how to do with AI. If we felt we could make a meaningful difference in those problems, I paid for everything. and whatever we invented, we released for free. So that was inspired by a lot of projects, but obviously the project I did with my son and his diabetes, the project I mentioned earlier about refugee orphans. But you get these messages, some of which are literally dying kids, families with dying kids. Others are companies that want to do better in their hiring, but don't know how to do it and don't know what to do. And some are like the UN. How do AI is happening? What should the UN's ethical policies be? And the reason I felt hopeful in these moments is they represent, all right, so maybe I'm not interested in doing lie detection for the CIA, but in being able to analyze faces, maybe I can tell when a student has lost interest in what the teacher is saying. And that same thing I learned how to do in 1999 with a very fancy updated model, analyzing faces, that's what we use to reunite the orphans with their extended family members. And it's also a system I got to build. This is Google Glass behind me here, that I got to design for Google Glass to analyze people's facial expressions to help autistic children learn how to read facial expressions. So AI isn't good because it magically solves all problems. AI is good because it is an immensely powerful tool for us to choose to do good in the world, to pick a project that unambiguously will make the world better and to deploy it. And sometimes, like my health work, it's not like I can give away a treatment for Alzheimer's for free. So it makes sense for that to be a startup, to be a commercial entity. But they're all born out of the philanthropic lab. They all come out of the world should have a solution to this problem. And I happen to be able to help in bringing that into the world. And so scary as some of these moments might seem. And, I think getting interviewed by GPT, well, if you're a reporter, that probably sounds scary. If you're an artist and Pinterest is now absolutely shot through with AI generated slop, if you're a writer, if we could run through the long list, and you mentioned vibe coding, if you're a programmer, how long is that skill going to be viable? Maybe AI isn't quite at the point of completely autonomously writing large code bases, but it does kind of feel like I can hire a bunch of moderately motivated high school dropouts at this point. If I didn't really care about making breakthroughs and having perfect code and just have them monitor this thing, the results wouldn't be great, but it would get done. We could have this idea of a sort of a Jiffy Lube economy in which instead of professional engineers fixing our cars, we have a bunch of people with a basic education and a lot of computer support doing what used to be a professional job. And if nothing changes in how we do education and how we think about work, not just in America, but around the world, the Jiffy Lube economy is what we'll get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think it's refreshing to hear your hopefulness throughout that process of helping different people out with AI projects and machine learning projects. I think right now there's a lot of fear with AI, and we need to be educating people on, truly enhancing our human traits and the good in our human traits and solving problems that actually make the world a better place. So I think what you said there on, there's a philanthropic part of it and like really go into a problem that's a worldwide problem. Or it doesn't have to be super big, but a problem that we can solve with AI and not exactly flipping the script and removing things that aren't a problem with AI, So yeah, I think it's very important for people to understand that and to not feed into the hype of, AI removing jobs. It's a fear tactic.
It is a fear tactic, and there's a lot of sort of emotional responses here. And I find really unhelpful on a variety of sides. AI will destroy all of the jobs. This is just like the Industrial Revolution. It will create more jobs than anyone could ever hope to have. I have to say at this point, hearing people say, don't worry about it, it'll be just like the Industrial Revolution, have they ever read a book about what day-to-day lives for most people were like in the Industrial Revolution? It was not good.
Yeah.
So being so sanguine about it, both sides here really full of a kind of magical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting, in fact, I would say about both of the extremes, the dystopianists and the utopianists, is they seem to meet on the other side of having very little admiration for humanity. One group thinks we cannot be trusted with this. The other group, to be kind of blunt about the biggest proponents, think only I can be trusted with this. And, I just don't believe either of those things. The reality is, this is a real and immensely powerful tool, and the impact it will have on the world will be real and profound. I'm not a futurist, but some predictions are super easy. And, let's just put a tension right at it. Who wants to be the first person to die of an otherwise diagnosable cancer because we chose not to use AI? On the flip side, there's a study out of a group at MIT right now, which has gotten a lot of heated responses back and forth and a lot of legitimate criticism of their methodology. But in essence, what they found was people writing essays without computer help versus using a search engine versus using GPT. And they used actual neural measures here, EEG-based neural measures, had shown considerably less cognitive engagement and a lot less I would say, intercortical coupling going on that's indicative of deep processing. I'm somewhat oversimplifying the claim of the authors, but look, this might be making us stupider. Mm-hmm. So what's wrong about that study is that's not what their stuff found. It just showed that there was less processing in the people using GPT than the people not. In the moment, that doesn't mean very much. There's all sorts of implications of that. But the people that have responded with saying, oh, the methodology is terrible, but also it doesn't show anything important at all. No, actually, one of my companies is working in Alzheimer's. If we saw that profile of less neural cognitive engagement on a regular basis in a patient we were looking at, this person is at risk for cognitive decline, dementia, and yes, heightened risk for Alzheimer's. I made this claim many years ago, maybe like 15 years ago at this point, that there would be a causal relationship between use of GPS-based navigation systems, AI, and cognitive decline and diagnosable dementia. And about 5 years later, the results started coming in. There is a relationship between this. Now, my jokey way of putting it is maybe GPT is the new GPS. So the point isn't that AI is bad. I think that is a misrepresentation. The point is how we engage with it is key. If you let it do the work for you and you're not engaged, wow, I have a ton of research and some of it my own saying that is a big sign of potential cognitive decline, accelerated cognitive aging. I would be really worried. On the other hand, that assumes the only way you can engage, and we're just talking about large language models here, the only way you can engage with something like Gemini or ChatGPT is to let it do your writing for you. So I just wrote a book about AI and education and other things. You know what I wouldn't do? I wouldn't let AI write any of it. First off, even the best writer, which I think is probably Claude, is still a thoroughly mediocre writer from a stylistic perspective. It puts the punctuation in the right place. I'd rather read an essay from it than one of my grad students that, Jesus, I don't want to get into how bad the writing is today, but that spark that makes something worth reading, no, never. I wouldn't let it write any of it. And I'm someone who hates writing. It's just painful. I want perfect, and perfect is impossible. Here's how to make it even more painful. You do all the hard stuff, in this case, all the writing. You do all the programming. You do all of the stock analysis. Not saying you have to, but let's just say you do everything by hand, the nitty gritty, the blood and the sweat. And for me, both a lot of tears and a lot of cursing. I am a filthy, filthy pirate when I'm writing and when I'm coding, even more when I'm coding. But then you make it worse. Gemini, you are my nemesis, my lifelong worst enemy. Every mistake I've ever made in my entire career, you have discovered and pointed out to the world why I was wrong. Here's the next chapter for my new book. I just finished it. Read through it and explain to me in detail every mistake I've made, why I'm wrong, and what I need to do to fix it. So in that context, I'm not using AI to make my life easier. I'm using AI to make my life harder. But I'm making it harder in the ways that make me better. Mm-hmm. And this is what in my work I have called productive friction. So much of how AI is kind of being sold to us is it's going to take all the frictions away. AI will do the boring work so you can do all the fun stuff. Well, right off the first bat, we built a little economic model. It turns out if AI does all of the boring work, makes it easier to do the boring work, but actually doesn't make it easier to do the hard creative work, guess what? You get more boring work, not less. This idea that it doing all the boring work means you get to work on the creative work. So what happens if there's 1,000 times more email in your inbox? Do you think you're going to get more done on your core work? But the other is not just that it's going to get the boring work done, but that human value add. I think this is the core misunderstanding that I'm now about to break into. It's the core distinction in my book. We think in terms of skill levels. Traditionally, when we think about human beings, human capital, we have low skill, low pay, low education. It's whether any of that is fair to characterize, it's certainly how we've thought about the labor economics of all of this. So the more you get paid, the fancier school you go to, the better job you get, skill levels. And we've told a whole lot of people, parents and kids and job seekers, that they need to get these elite skills to be ready for the world. AI didn't care about any of that stuff. Elite, low, it's all the same to it. None of it matters. The only thing that matters is where we started our conversation. Is there data to be trained? So let's put it this way. We have this low skill, high skill split, which we built our whole education system on, our whole hiring system, and it doesn't matter anymore. AI can do all that stuff better than us on some level. Instead, we need to understand a different kind of split. I sometimes have called it routine creative, but here's a really concrete way of thinking about it. We can think of a world broken up into well-posed problems. These are problems that have explicitly right and wrong answers. If I'm going to give you a test and you're going to check a box and you'll be right or you'll be wrong, you'll solve an equation. These are all well-posed problems. They have right and wrong answers. We know what those answers are. I'm proud of humanity. How many answers we have figured out about the universe. How many of its secrets we've opened up. Well, I hate to break it to you. All of that is now the domain of AI. Except in the most extreme cases where there's very little information, AI can answer well-posed questions better than almost any human. And the few cases where humans are doing better than that, those are the best humans that are elite experts in their fields. You want a quick, free answer in 20 seconds on neuroscience? Don't ask me. Ask GPT. It'll give you a cleaner, cheaper, faster answer than I possibly could. And you can pull up GPT essentially for free on your phone. So all of that stuff, this entire economy we've based on people knowing esoteric information about the world is gone. It's all free in your pocket. So if you were an alarmist, that would sound terrifying. And let me not minimize, it means change. It forces us to change. So what's left? Well, here's the amazing part of what's left. What's left is everything we don't already know. What's left is all of the ill-posed problems. Forget the right answers. We don't even know what the questions are. And the reason I say that's a positive is because everything humanity has figured out, as proud as I am, it's finite. There's only so much we know about the world. What we don't know is infinite. There will always be unknown to explore. And for now, that is a uniquely human job. Because by its very nature, AI is trained on well-posed problems. Predict the next word in an actual sentence. We know what the next word is. That's how we train the model. If it predicts it wrong, we give it a mathematical update to its internal mathematical models. If it does the wrong protein fold, in this case, the other AI-based Nobel Prize this year was for chemistry, for AlphaFold, and it essentially plays a computer game against itself to fold proteins. And if it does it wrong, well, then it suffers a little penalty in the game, and it learns and it updates. So if you're really clever, you can set a game or get a training data set that allows something amazing. A conversation with an intelligence that seems like not just another human being, but a human being who's an expert in everything. Or a human being that can imagine millions of possible protein configurations. But it still can only do it within the bounds of its underlying models, which are the things we already know about the world. There's some caveats there, but that's a useful way of thinking about it. Humans remain uniquely capable, not just of dealing with uncertainty and unknown things, but I'm going to go so far as to bring in an absurd word, meta uncertainty. We are actually aware of our own uncertainty about the uncertainty of the world. And in fact, what is the most exciting new paper in AI, which wonderfully matches some of my own philanthropic projects, looks at medical diagnostics and finds the best isn't doctors, it isn't AIs, it isn't even teams of AIs collaborating. It is a hybrid collaboration of human doctors and teams of AIs together. They are the most creative. They are the most competent and accurate in their diagnostics. They're better at coming up with treatment plans. This super exciting future is one, I'll be honest, because this is what I interviewed to go to grad school on. It's cyborgs. It isn't necessarily cyborgs of literally unjamming things in your brain, although I do have a research area in that space. It's cyborgs of humans and machines very naturally, seamlessly making collective collaborative decisions together. But the only problem is that's a choice. We can choose to do that. And that choice is hard. It's effortful. It requires deep cognitive engagement. Most human beings will not make that choice. And even many companies will say, but using AI to just kind of automate away all of those easy, well-posed, routine decisions, why don't we just do that? And we'll save a lot of money, and it'll be easy, and then we'll be done. Again, I'm not a futurist. These are choices we have. One is super easy to do. I think it comes with profound long-term costs. The other has a lot of early costs. We have to rethink how humans make decisions in the world. We have to rethink how we train people. Everything changes. The long-term vision of that, though, is a truly transformed world.
I think you hit on a whole bunch of different topics that really will speak to our audience, I think, with how humans need to interact with AIs. And I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into that, like what the capabilities are of humans versus machines, as well as, what true human potential and what true human characteristics are going to succeed in the long run working alongside with these AIs. So yeah, no, thank you for sharing all that. It was great information. So you were saying how the best, I guess the best possible future, and even though you're not a futurist, like the best future that we can have is how humans and machines will work together, and that will create something great with the human characteristics and with the machine characteristics, both of their strengths. So for the human side of things, what type of characteristics and how should humans be interacting with AIs, and like what did they need to bring to the table?
So it's interesting starting, we were walking through the history earlier. I talked about this particular period of sort of 2013, 14, 15, where I was both doing academic work at UC Berkeley and I had my own edtech company, and I was the chief scientist of this company, Guild, doing AI and hiring. And at the same time that at Guild, we had this database of 122 million people, and we were looking at what qualities predict the best workers. What predicts who's going to get hired? That's simple. Tell me the university you went to, your last employer, and your first name. Like that, suddenly I know a lot. It certainly tells me whether you're going to get a job interview or not. But turns out once I know other things about you, none of those are terribly predictive anymore. It's not that they're not predictive. They're just much less so. So as we're mining through all this data, we're noticing first what traditional things, like none of the skills people were listing on LinkedIn, seem to be very predictive of anything. Amongst professional programmers, your list of programming skills doesn't tell me whether you're good at them or if the programs you write solve complicated problems or not. Guido van Nostrum says he knows Python. Well, sure, he does. He came up with it. So, but what tells the difference? And then we go to other sites and we look at like how many upvotes you had on coder sites like Stack Overflow. Again, social signals did not predict much of anything. So we needed to look deeper. And interestingly, at the same time I'm doing this, and I actually gave a TED talk about some of this, in my education work, I'm looking at what predicts long-term life outcomes in little kids. And we're seeing all this stuff. Some of it's core cognitive abilities like numeracy, literacy, working memory span, basic intelligence factors. Some are social skills, perspective taking, communication skills. Some are emotional. I mentioned resilience, growth mindset, strength of purpose, and life meaningfulness. That last one, huge predictor. This is an amazing Prestigious National Academy of Science paper just on that one single factor being a positive predictor of almost anything you would want to be true about you. Metacognition, your ability to think about your own thinking, self-assessment, strategic planning. I mentioned meta uncertainty, your sensitivity to your own uncertainty about a situation. And it turns out all of these things are different in different people. And here's an interesting, it's not a paradox, but it's an interesting twist. At a population level, every single one of these things I just mentioned is predictive of positive life outcomes. And sure enough, in our data set of 122 million people, is predictive of positive career outcomes at a population level. At an individual level, no single factor predicts much of anything. Well, that's strange. If working memory across 1,000 kids predicts who will earn more money and who will have better diets and live longer, why wouldn't it predict it about one particular kid? And as we began to look in more detail, what we saw was it's the pattern of strengths that you have. And it's not one strength, but you have a diversity of them. And so no single one of these factors or life skills or foundational skills is itself either necessary or sufficient. But as you kind of add them up, they dramatically increase your likelihood of positive life outcomes. And then we found in our work in hiring, dramatically increase the likelihood of the quality of work you were going to do. But interestingly, if you were brilliant and creative and driven, then maybe you don't have great social skills, and that's okay. And maybe if you do have amazing social skills and you're pretty smart, it's not the end of the world if you don't have the greatest emotional intelligence. So it's these sets of diverse skills interacting together, which then now when I hear people talk about things like problem solving, when I look at my data, we actually see problem solving as kind of an ill-posed concept. Because when we look at it, we see, oh, you could solve a problem by being a driven genius. And you can solve a problem by being an emotionally sensitive, very introspective social leader. And you can do it by being someone who thinks totally differently about how the world works, but being driven to make change. All of those people solve problems. None of those people solve them the same. But they're all problem solvers. And maybe one of the reasons why it's been so hard to identify these qualities in people is sometimes we expect things like problem solving skills to be these, I can give you a test and everyone that is good at it will answer the questions exactly the same, like the way we test for whether you know how to do math. But actually, when you begin looking at sort of advanced high-level math, not the specifics of solving a problem, but how would I explore an unsolved mathematical conjecture? Well, now it's just like that. It's math. You're probably pretty smart. But some people are great at finding collaborators. Some people are great at thinking about problems differently. Some of them are just driven. You hear a lot of Nobel Prize winners talk after it. Many of the economics winners will happily acknowledge, I am far from the smartest economist in the world. I just happened to see this one problem differently, or I kept working at it and I kept working at it. So this is the human side. It's messy and it's all over the place. I virtually guarantee you all those Nobel Prize winners do possess esoteric elite knowledge. That is not why they won the Nobel Prize. The world is full of geniuses with esoteric knowledge, and most of us don't do shit. In fact, most of us take orders. And so understanding what are my unique strengths and how do I develop them out? Because the hard thing about this whole story that I'm sharing right now is these qualities that are uniquely human and predict positive life outcomes, but I'm also now stating are complementary to the strengths of AI. These are the things that make the people that really take AI and do amazing things with it, this is what they have. They also probably know a lot of fancy knowledge about the problems that they're working in. I asked Bard, before Google developed Gemini, they had a program called Bard. I had this very weird problem I was working on. What is the confidence interval of the product of two hierarchical regression parameters? Well, its answer to me was the confidence interval of the product of two random variables. And it gave a correct answer. Except that wasn't the answer to the problem that I asked. But what I could see was Bard misunderstood. It thought it understood the question. Of course, again, it doesn't really think anything, but for our purposes. And it gave me a correct answer to a similar but simpler problem. So I said, no. Let's work through it. First, what is the confidence interval on a regression parameter? What's the confidence interval on a random variable, etc.? I walked it through all of the steps. In the end, I had the equation in Markdown and the Python code to execute it on my data. Bard couldn't produce that answer on its own. I couldn't produce that answer on my own. What I brought was an understanding of the problem. Bard gave me an answer and it was wrong. I didn't know what the right answer was, but I could tell that this was wrong and I could push back. I could reframe the problem. We could explore together what this new framing would be. And in the end, we did something neither of us could do on our own. That core framing, AI knows everything, but it understands nothing. And I know that this is a metaphor or a strong analogy that isn't going to work for everyone because not many people get to be professors, but many of us have mentored people at work, for example. Working in that creative moment, that truly collaborative moment with an AI, for me, feels like working with my graduate students. They are the world expert on the problem that is their dissertation. They are the person on this planet that is putting in 24/7 for 5 to 7 years. They truly know more than I do. Why am I there? Because they know everything. I understand everything. And together, we're better than we could have been separately. Hopefully, in working with my grad students, I'm imparting how to do the understanding part, because the books and the lectures can do all the knowing parts.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Let's dive into education a little bit more since we didn't talk about that yet. Where do you think we need to improve in terms of educating children, educating teens, or educating just people in the world on AI? Like what types of, we already talked about skills, but I guess what
Yeah,
types
but here's the funny thing. Teaching someone AI, teaching them about it, like, it doesn't excite me very much, partially because a lot of the people that use it the most just logged in one day and started playing with it, if we're talking about things like GPT, or in my case, just literally out of the blue, someone recommended me to work in this. Like, I'd never done anything in this field before. And it was exciting and it was fun and you could do so much, so I got into it. So the idea that people need to be educated about AI, I think, is not unreasonable, but it's also a bit of a distraction. It solves no problems. Instead, what I'm really interested in here is how do we lift all of those qualities I was talking about earlier. So I'm gonna call them meta learning how to learn. These are the things that predict life outcomes, probably have always predict life outcomes in human beings throughout history. It's just now, in a funny sense, it's what's left. Knowing things is not a uniquely human trait anymore. So what's left are these deeply human qualities. And none of them are explicitly supported in our education system. Partially, it's understandable. I said they're about ill-posed problems. How are you going to test them? If the very nature of the things we're trying to support are about your ability to explore the unknown, then I can't give you, computer-based test with an A, B, C, D, E, pick the right answer problem. It doesn't work that way. Furthermore, it also isn't learned that way. I can't give you a book on resilience. If you want to become resilient, you have to experience failure. It's the only way. It is an experiential learning. We can talk about it. I can provide you with metacognitive tools that will make you better able to learn from your experiences. But fundamentally, resilience, strength of purpose, growth mindset, perspective taking. We can run through this long list of things. These take time. They are effortful. It's what I was complaining about with that MIT study on GPT users for essay writing. I don't have any problem with people speeding things up by making use of AI. My whole career has been based on that. My problem is, when are you thinking hard about the problem? Are you really meeting the second side of the promise? AI does the boring work, so I'm going to work hard on the creative work. The evidence is overwhelmingly AI does the hard work, and then you say, thank you very much, and you send it in to your teacher. In fact, there is one hard and fast rule about AI and education. If an AI tutor ever gives you the answers, you never learn anything. In fact, the best AI tutors typically are frustratingly Socratic. They just ask more questions. They get you to think about it. That's what we need. And interestingly, if we really think about some of the things that need to change, I think about a paper that my wife and I published. It involves AI, and that this is the AI we built that could listen to students talk to each other and predict their grades. What was fascinating is in this data set of university students, what was interesting wasn't the students that would pass the class versus those that weren't, though that's very informative and useful. And our goal was to then not to do automated grading, but to tell the professors, hey, these 3 students won't pass your class, but here are learning experiences that have been effective for students like them. So if we can predict that your student will pass the class, 1, you never have to have an exam. And 2, no one fails the class. If you knew ahead of time, you get to do what's called competency-based education and just teach them until they get it. And every learning experience is also an assessment experience, and the 2 go hand in hand. That's a separate thing. Everybody loved that company, by the way. It got me written up by Inc. magazine. Literally no one wanted to use the technology. It wasn't the problem that people were trying to solve. If we had built an automated grading system, we'd have sold that company for $100 million. The fact that we wanted to improve education made for a bad education company. But in this case, where we're doing this analysis, we're listening to these students. The interesting thing was the difference between the A and the B students. Because the B students gave normative answers. When they were given a well-posed question, so this is an online discussion forum, they had to participate as part of the class, but you could post anything. You could talk about the weather, you'd get full credit just for being there. Mm-hmm. The B students, the ones that did talk about the weather, they didn't pass the class. The B students talked about the course material, and they talked about it 100% correctly. They gave correct answers to well-posed questions. The A students were routinely wrong. Not wrong because they didn't understand the difference between Darwin and Lamarck, or wrong because they talked about the weather or they reasoned by anecdote. They were wrong because they were MBA students in an Econ 101 course who were trying to understand collective bargaining. The B students just talked verbatim what was brought up in class about here's what auto workers do and here's the laws and blah, blah, blah. The A students said, well, what about nurses? How is it different for nurses? Which wasn't discussed in class. And they regularly got it wrong because nurses are a very different worker class than auto workers. They have more different regulations, different labor power, more educated. But our model, despite them being wrong, said not only are they going to pass the class, they're going to graduate faster than the other students. And our model was correct. What is most fascinating about what I just went through isn't that, as I hope everyone can see from my example, the students that did better in the class were the ones that explored. The ones that took the course material and then tried to understand it by probing their own misconcepts. Mm-hmm. What is even more alarming and notable is the vast majority of students, even when there was no penalty for being wrong, were unwilling to be wrong in public. Even though the A students, and we all knew who the bright students in our courses were. We know who's at the top of the class. You can see them exploring those ideas. And you know they're going to get an A. But instead, you give the answer straight out of the book. In a world where all of those answers are now free in our pockets, or $1 for a million tokens, it is your ability to explore the unknown. It is your ability to give a productively wrong answer that is your value to the world. What do you know about this problem that literally no one else in the world knows? We need people to have a very different relationship with uncertainty and recognize my value now is not what makes me boringly the same. I know the same thing as everyone else, therefore I'll get a solid job as an accountant. No, GPT's got all those jobs now. Or that part of those jobs. What makes you valuable is now what you would do with what GPT tells you. What makes you valuable is your ability to recognize, I know what GPT is telling me, but for these reasons, and maybe even for just my spidey senses tingling, I think it's got it wrong. And here's why. And what's interesting is I alluded to this earlier in the example of the collaborative, the hybrid AI human collective intelligence paper, is that cycle just keeps going. The AI analyzes the human output, the humans ingest the AI insights, and the humans are injecting the crazy part, the mad science. And the AI brings it back into the patterns of the known. And then the humans extrapolate, and then the AI reconstitutes again and again. That is the smartest system. Cyborgs is what we need to be. And that's what I want education system to be focused on. Because even if AI disappeared tomorrow, not only is what I'm describing the things that give people better jobs and would prepare them for that better life, these people are wealthier, yes, but they're also happier and healthier causally because of these qualities. We should have been doing this for the last 10,000 years. I will grant that 10,000 years ago, we probably didn't have the social systems in place to make this happen, but we could have been, and it would have made people's lives better. This isn't a uniquely AI moment, except that if AI truly becomes a robust part of our lives and a ubiquitous part of our lives, let's assume we have the energy to pay for it all. We have the rare earths to keep these data centers open. It's worth understanding these answers. Not only is this what gives us a better life, it's the only thing that's left. Jobs won't disappear. There'll be jobs for people on the other end of the skills ladder. But the brutal truth of those jobs is there'll be jobs that won't be worth building AIs to do. And who wants a job that's so menial we couldn't even bother building a robot to do it? Because unfortunately, there will be a human being somewhere in the world that will do it for less than the robot. And we desperately need to pull as many people as possible into that creative economy. It's truly going to be a challenging, like civilization level endeavor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I think your perspective and your opinion on, the A students versus the B students and really diving into what makes the A students so great, even though they were getting things wrong, is really the questioning aspect of it and understanding their perspective of things and trying to solve these problems that don't have exact answers. And I think that will be key in educating students to really harness those skills and be able to ask those questions.
There's this economist, a guy named Raj Chetty at Harvard. He's probably my odds-on favorite for a future Nobel Prize in his field. Some of his more famous work is the Lost Einstein's work about how intergenerational mobility affects these amazing, brilliant, poor kids that never have the chance to go on and invent something. But he also has this earlier work looking at value-added models of teachers. Now, in education, this can be very controversial, year over year, standardized test scores, which teachers are better. But he doesn't do that. He does what he does in general, which is he's looking at longer-term life outcomes or even intergenerational outcomes. So what's the value-added model of teachers on longer-term life outcomes, which, as you can appreciate, means a lot to my research, where I'm looking at life outcomes. Mm-hmm. So his finding is fascinating. There's a lot to it, but the one that's most relevant here in the moment is the teachers that have the biggest positive impact. Their middle school students are more likely to go to university. They're more likely to earn more, substantially more when they're older. They have a real substantial impact, despite the fact that this is 10, 20 years in the future, those outcomes. They have a big impact on those outcomes. What is most interesting, those very same teachers, their students' year-to-year test scores, if anything, dip slightly. So all of our standardized, well-posed assessments say, oh my God, these students are doing as well as they should be able to. The students of the teachers that provably are changing the trajectories of their lives for the better. And interestingly, a paper came out recently and found, I'm going to argue, essentially very similar teacher qualities and very similar sort of, if you will, lessons imparted also play with how likely a student is to become incarcerated in their lifetimes. So the complete opposite end. And similarly, is largely unrelated to traditional teaching factors. So there's something that these teachers are doing. These elite teachers and positive outcomes, these effectively elite teachers preventing negative outcomes, that isn't about getting more right answers to well-posed questions, but are truly transforming the lives of these students. And if you want to know what education should look like in an AI-rich world, go look at those teachers. And I think the one unhelpful thing to do would be to say, but those teachers are like magic. We can't make that happen. No, it's just the nature of what I'm talking about. It's about the ill-posed. Clearly being smart is not enough. Clearly being able to answer these questions is not enough. And I have many colleagues and colleagues of colleagues that have incredible elite academic backgrounds, and they have wonderful lives in the grand scheme of things. But some of these people were summa cum laude at Stanford, and now they got a very nice job as a dermatologist in Pennsylvania. Like, yeah, that's a great life, but your peers are clerks in the Supreme Court. They're doing groundbreaking neurology research. They're transforming the world. And interestingly, this is not research, it's just my observation, but I kind of think it's true. It's even at those elite universities, it's the half of the students that were kind of fuck ups that are going on to transform the world, and many of them not. But that's the thing. They're all over the place. And the ones that did everything right, they answered all the test questions exactly the way they were supposed to. As soon as they got out of academia, their life kind of flatlined. I will admit, it flatlined in a wonderful place. No one would be unhappy with that life. But it could have been so much more. They could be changing the world. And it turns out, if you're not willing to be wrong in public, if you're not willing to tell your boss, you know what, I think you're wrong, and here's why. If you're the boss and you're not willing to create the psychological safety to hear not just the truth, to hear your employees wrongly tell you things, but not hold it against them for being wrong because they are being constructive, then we're trapped in a world where we might as well just let AIs do all the work because they're going to do that stuff better than us. So this is what I'm thinking of for that education going forward. And I tried in the book to have some very grounded chapters on here are the targeted qualities, here are the experiences that really bring it up in young kids, could bring it up internally in you as an adult, and even to be fostering inside your company, inside your community, with separate chapters for each of those. But just recognizing this is hard work. It is easier to just answer a question correctly, memorize it as best you can and give an answer. Changing yourself at a deep level, these foundational skills, meta learning, it's brutal, but the payoff is the rest of your life.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I think looking at education, like I've always looked at schools and understood like their way of testing and their way of giving that knowledge to the students is not the best way that we should be going about it. And I think with AI, coming into the picture, I think those skills need to be changed a whole bunch in how they're tested and, how they learn. Really excited to look at your book and, look at those examples because I really do think our education system needs to shift in a way where kids are going to enhance those skills. And I think there's some schools out there already that do, foster those skills, whether they have classes that they're going outside and they're like solving problems together and all that stuff. So I think there's
I
hope
have
in
to
that.
say, collaborative learning,
Hmm.
multi-age learning. An example is I don't like gamified learning. In fact, I gave a whole TED talk about why that's a bad thing. Um, but building games as a learning experience, you need to work out the physics engine. You need the plot of the game. You need a concept. You need art. You need math. You need code. It's not all one person. All the students are collaborating together on this. Like, what an amazing experience. But in that experience, you have to appreciate what an astonishing teacher you need for that experience. Because it's a teacher that needs to understand the art and the physics. It's a teacher that needs to be able to find the student where they are in the moment and give them the support they need, rather than a flat lecture that everyone is doing the exact same thing. We're going to learn how to factorize a polynomial today, all of us at the exact same moment, regardless of whether you're ready for that or not. I mean, I'm a nerd.
Hmm.
Of course, everyone should know how to factorize a polynomial. It changes how you think about the world if you really understand why that's taking place and what's going on. But if you don't understand that, if it's just being forced and you're just memorizing things, then it hasn't changed anything about you. And it hasn't transformed that student. At which point, why are we doing this? It's perverse at that point.
Right. Yeah. And I honestly feel like I can relate to that journey of like going from trying to get all the questions correct and, just tell the teacher what they want to hear, and kind of shifted that mindset into why is the world, the way that it is, and really trying to question different problems. And I think it really has changed me for the better, in that instance. I'm not just like looking at something and just trying to solve it, give the right answer. I'm looking at it in a different light and trying to understand, how it works and what can we do to work together to make it a better place to be. Yeah, it's a long story there in terms of the journey and like how that happened, but I feel like there's hope in that instance of educating young people to kind of shift that mindset into more questioning and problem solving and collaboration.
If there's something I deeply believe, to put a pin in the whole conversation, it is people can change.
Hmm.
The other thing that I don't just believe, but I know, is that change is hard. So they go hand in hand, and that's just the reality. If you either are unwilling to pay that price, or if you just wrongly believe people can't change, then build AI and automate all of it. That's the rational decision. But that's not the world I want for myself or my kids. It's not the best world we could build, and I'm a genuine believer that humanity can be better. I think that's the thing I took away from all that science fiction that I read. That was my starting point for AI. Is the dreams of the amazing things that could be done. And what I've learned as a scientist, but it hasn't dissuaded me, is, well, yeah, but those things are going to be really hard. If we're willing to be honest with ourselves, we can actually do those amazing things.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I think it's a hopeful perspective, and it's an educated perspective on we can do this, but it'll take some resilience, it'll take effort to make that change happen. And I think those people are going to be the ones to change the world because of that drive and that belief in themselves. Hey, thank you so much, Vivian, for joining us today on Beyond Evolution. I think you gave such a grounded perspective on, understanding AI and kind of going back to the beginning, like understanding machine learning and how the practical side of AI actually works instead of just hearing all this chatter and kind of finding that stableness through all the noise. So thank you for providing that in the beginning. I think talking about AI in education was definitely a highlight of the episode, and really understanding what human principles and human aspects we need to be learning, we need to be teaching children and everyone in this world, as well as how we can show up to AI in the best way so that we can work alongside them. to create a better world. Where can our audience find you online?
The easiest place to find me is socos.org, SOCOS.org. You can learn about my companies, my philanthropic work, and the book, and my newsletter. If you're insane, you can even pay for the newsletter, but you don't have to because I also give it away for free. But if you do pay for it, all of that goes to support our philanthropic work at the Human Trust. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. I run a philanthropic lab to help people. I have to be at least a little bit discoverable in this world. And the book, currently titled How to Rhubarb Proof Your Kids, will continuing discussions with publishers notwithstanding, will be out this fall.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. And to wrap it up, we like to remind our audience that while this world of AI and what it means for humanity can be exciting yet uncertain, it's a journey of growth. So keep learning, keep evolving, but allow yourself to just be.